But thank you for joining me. My name's Dominic Piper. I'm the editor of Paid Dirt and Gold Mining Journal and your session chair, panel moderator for this session. I'll introduce our panelists first. I won't go into full biographies because we don't really have time. But I'll start on, oh, they've hidden a long way from me. They're obviously nervous about the questions I'm going to ask them. I'll start on the far side. We have Allan Mulligan of Harena Resources. Allan, thanks for joining us. Founder of Harena, I should say. Rare earth developer in Madagascar, as we have already heard today. Then we have Leeanne de Bruin, Chief Financial Officer of Perseus Mining. We've had plenty of Perseus representation in this conference already, so I won't go into details there. And then Chris Anokye, a very experienced mine manager with more than 20 years' experience in the mining industry, both here and in Africa. Our topic in this session is local content and capacity building, skills development in the African continent, and we sort of developed this idea because really, down the years at Africa Down Under, we've had a lot of discussions about the role Australian companies can play in developing skills, capacity, enabling enterprise and economic development in different African jurisdictions. So we thought it'd be an important conversation to have. So we thought we'd bring together three Australian-African or African-Australian. I haven't decided which way around you qualify, the three of you, but all born on the African continent, of course, and now all working to some extent here in Australia. And so I think it'd be a really interesting conversation. There will be some microphones roving around, and I'll try not to dominate the conversation. So I'm going to kick off, though. Leeanne, I'm going to start with you. Perseus Mining is obviously active in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, now in Tanzania, and Sudan, of course, as well. Jeff said during his presentation yesterday how much development of professionals and artisan and skilled trades the company has done down the years in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And now you're seeing the benefits of that elsewhere in your operations. I wanted to ask you, as an established mid-tier miner, is skills development and capacity building in your host countries and host communities, is this a sustainability issue? Is this an ESG proposition, or is it sound business sense?
I'm assuming this is on.
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks. I think from my perspective, and I think I'm speaking on Perseus's behalf as well, is, as we talk about sustainability, and we often form that into health, safety, environment, community kind of topics. But, from our perspective, if you're not training up your communities, you're not training up your workforce, your business will quickly become unsustainable, because I think we, as people going into Africa, have an accountability to develop and train those individuals and make sure that we're working towards a nationalised workforce that's well trained. It's an accountability, but also it is a business imperative, because your communities and your employees will quickly start to tell you if you're not doing enough to localise employment and to employ people around the area. So from my perspective, the only way you make your business sustainable, and has been a massive focus of ours, is on training and development, and making sure, for example, our Ghana workforce now is 100% Ghanaian, and probably are one of the best teams in the Perseus fold. So, it is possible. You've just got to invest time in it.
Thanks, Leeanne. Chris, can I ask you, as somebody who grew up in that West African mining sector, have you seen a change in the approach of international miners down the years of promoting local talent and promoting local professionals?
Thank you, Dominic. Obviously, the answer is yes. I come from a background where mining started initially by the British, and so it was an old school way of doing mining. Fortunately, along the line, the mine that I started working for decided to expand, and that brought in international expatriates from Canada, essentially. Then, fortunately for me, I had an opportunity, having developed myself to a certain level, I had an opportunity to also go out as an expatriate on the eastern side of Africa, where the Australian technology was much more predominant. And you could see the vast difference between, my previous experience and the experience that I had entered, in East Africa. The Australian experience is such that, apart from the academic work that everybody acquires from the classroom, they go specifically to the field and then develop a kind of standard operating procedures, which incorporates your academic work as well. So you end up being much more professional, okay? And so from that perspective, one sees, the Australian experience perhaps being of a much higher standard, contributing much more to the productivity of the mine. Yeah.
And is the mining profession, we see in Australia, mining is seen as a profession that people can develop in very strong professional skills, and there's a very clear pathway to professional development in mining in Australia, Western Australia certainly. Is that the same in Ghana, and are you benefiting from those structures that are in place from Australian and other international companies?
Yes, as I've said earlier, the Australian one is quite unique in the sense that you get an added on, extra of having the on-the-job training as well, and then also the kind of systems that are put in place that ensure safety is always held premium. And so in the end, you end up becoming a rounded person where not only do you look at your professional, background, but you look at even the financial aspect as well, and therefore, you make much more contribution towards the operations. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. I want to come to you now, Allan, because I'm very interested in your recent career in the junior exploration space, in particular, because it strikes me that Leeanne and Chris are talking about skills development and opportunities in established mining districts, established mining operations. But in recent years, with your work with Harena, but also with Walkabout and Ionic, you've been working in communities that are unused to mining, really. When you go into a new community with a new project, what are your priorities about taking into account what Leeanne says about engaging local communities? How do you even start in assessing what can happen in that local community?
So the pillar of any exploration leading to potential development is a local first. And local is LACO, we say. So local first, national second, and international at last resort. And I'm glad to see that Perseus is working hard at that as well. We can't afford at that early stage to do training in training centers and employ training officers. So we use a process of skills transfer on the job, as Chris said, and also stewardship. When candidates develop so well and they show management and they show other capabilities, in time, they possibly get sent away to the technicons and other learning areas with a view to coming back.
Thanks, Allan. I suppose, Leeanne, that sort of translates into the operational stage as well, doesn't it? How do you, is there an identification process of identifying local people with skills that are going to be beneficial or can be worked on, or an aptitude towards developing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you start the mine, there's a certain level of skill set you require. But, if you look at our Sissingi mine up in the north of Côte d'Ivoire, I mean, there's a great story about an Ivorian gentleman that came out of the village there. I'm not sure if he'd even really finished school, and he's one of our, fundamental process operators. But that took a lot of investment. But it's just about recognising that generally, people and Africans are very keen to learn. But I think what we've tried to make sure is we put in training across the spectrum. So we do training in the community, on baseline, just construction work, teaching them how to do just, day-to-day activities. But then once we've got people in the operations, then we focus on, very distinct training programs, whether it's in the processing field or whether it's in the mining field. So, and they're hungry for information, and they're hungry to learn. And I think, to Chris's point, I always, and I speak a lot to my team here in Australia, it's always important to realise, even with dealing with the finance team, a lot of Africans didn't go home, didn't go to premium schools or have computers at schools and all of this kind of stuff. So there is a huge amount of effort and investment and patience that this needs to go into upskilling people. But that time and patience, if you invest it, it really does pay off, because the good thing about the African population is they're very keen to learn.
Chris, I think you would reiterate those comments.
Certainly. Yep. I think Lee is right on the spot in the sense that Africans are eager to learn, and especially in the mining area where, wages are comparatively higher than the average. Everybody going into mining is so zealous about trying to make sure that whatever he's assigned is done properly so that he doesn't lose his or her job. And so those are some of the positives that international companies, stand to gain when they enter into Africa. Yep.
And how important is it, in your experience, being a Ghanaian national working on operations in Ghana first, but then in Tanzania, were you able to act, or was there a need even to act as a sort of conduit, a cultural conduit between the international miner and the local communities?
Certainly. Australia, let's say, for instance, Australia and Tanzania, or for that matter, Ghana, there is this vast cultural differences. And so for someone, with both experiences, you tend to understand both cultures and therefore be able to impact positively on the locals, okay? By way of education, by way of explaining issues, they tend to understand it much more better than, let's say, an Australian going directly to speak to, a local, okay? The set of understanding tends to be, much more closer when the culturally biased person, takes up that kind of assignment. Yeah.
Allan, I expect that you would see the same thing even at the exploration stage of having a few senior leaders who can help bridge that gap.
Yeah, there's a few things we do. One is we don't employ, for example, hand labourers, we don't employ the same ones all the time. Whenever we have a campaign, we make sure it's different fellows from the village, from perhaps a different street, who come and apply. And so we rotate them. And through this, they're all getting an exposure to work systems, and they all feel a little bit better that they're not left out. Jobs are everything, and we're not investing in training is not investing in the company, it's investing in the people. And that leads to well-being in the company, not only in its productivity and efficiency, but also in the culture and how people feel about working there. And that local attitudes, those local attitudes, filter all the way up to the top tiers of government. So it's very important to us.
Thanks, Allan. Leeanne, even just listening to both Chris and Allan there, it made me think of, there must have been particular challenges for Perseus during the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and border closures. It must have given an opportunity for local talent to rise to more prominent positions within Perseus operations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you had, and I think that's one of the real upsides of localization and focusing on it is that, even today, we have expats that fly in and out 6 weeks on and 3 weeks off, and when those 3 weeks are not there, you feel the gap. But I think during COVID, we quickly learned that the capability was there. And I always say, local content is about shifting a paradigm of thinking around what is actually possible. And I think, that the point is around, don't go into Africa thinking that, people are never going to be able to do that, or they're not going to be able to achieve that, because they really can. You just have to take a different approach sometimes to how you get those outcomes. And I think Chris is 100% right. I do think that, elevating your nationals into senior manager roles creates people can see themselves, they identify it, they go, oh, there's an opportunity for me. But also the way that Ghanaians or Tanzanians and all of them explain things is in a way that they generally understand a little bit better than possibly coming from an international foreigner.
And Chris, now that you have this experience in Australia as well, so your cross-cultural experience is even stronger. Have you considered opportunities? I know you're a representative of AMPA. Have you considered opportunities whereby you could extend that by taking your on-the-ground experience in Australia back into Africa?
Oh, why not? In fact, we need to give back to society, particularly those of us from Africa where we get so much bound, the bond between yourself and the community is so strong. You would always want to give back to the community. So if such opportunity comes, in fact, that is the more reason why AMPA exists, to help Australian companies going back into Africa, navigate some of the difficult challenges so that in a way, both Africa and Australia, there will be a win-win, benefit for everyone. Yep.
Allan, we're talking a lot here about employment and skilled labour and skilled professionals, but local content and the impact of mining goes a lot deeper than that. It goes into local economies and local enterprise. How early does an explorer developer start looking at opportunities to build linkages with other parts of the local economy?
Well, from the minute the first drill truck arrives, we start feeding into and from the local community. So that symbiotic relationship is there, and it has to be there. We can't build fences and exclude the local people. That's their land that we are trespassing on initially.
Leeanne, does Perseus approach it with a specific strategy around building local enterprise opportunities, economic upliftment that lasts, perhaps beyond the life of the mine?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key thing with all of this is you can be very sort of euphoric about it all, but it's about managing expectations, because if you don't manage expectations, that will become a problem for you. But each country is slightly nuanced. I think in Ghana, we quickly learned that, it wasn't for us to tell the people what they needed, or it was for us to consult with them broadly and set up a committee, or what we call the Edikan Trust, and they've come up with the things that they think that they need. And so, that's how we drive it there. Ivory Coast has got a very structured environment. What they call their community development funds. We contribute 0.2% of all our revenue into this fund, and similarly they go through a consultation process. So it's every country is different, but I think the key thing is you can't tell them what they want. I think our balance to your last question is Africans generally, because when you go and see where they live, they generally want infrastructure. That's the first thing. For us, the challenge is to strike a balance between infrastructure and sustainable, development kind of projects, where livelihood programs, where beyond the mine, those they will continue. So, for example, in Tanzania at the moment, we're very focused on the resettlement program. We're busy building 280 homes for the community that we're resettling. We're getting them very involved in the community with the contractors in the actual construction works, skilling them up, because what we did at Edikan was we did the same thing, and we used those same people all the way through the Edikan mine to do various small jobs around the mine, and then we started to see them doing them in the community as well. So,
Chris, did you have something to add there?
I only wanted to add to what Allan said previously regarding trying to rotate the kind of workforce within a community. In a way, you get much more people associated with the company, and that becomes a plus in the sense that everybody sees that company as a source of, prosperity. Okay, so if there should ever be any attempt of disruption, okay, to the asset, through agitations, you get the community itself being, standing up, against those kind of rioters, sort of. Yeah, so it's a strategy that I think that is worth emulating, in the sense that you get much more people involved in the project, and you win those guys also on your side.
Thank you. We have to excuse Allan now because he's got a meeting to attend. So thank you very much, Allan. We're going to go on for a couple of more minutes because we've got a few minutes left before we have to break. But if you could just join me in thanking Allan.
Thank you.
He's going to talk about employing thousands of people at his next opportunity. I've done enough work for the day, so I'm going to ask people in the audience, have we got any questions or comments from the audience? We've got some roving microphones. You can just raise your hand and ask. No, you're going to make me do all of the work. Well, that is a challenge then. Chris, I'm going to stick with you because
there's a hand up there.
Oh, there's a hand. Oh.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Humphrey Simba. I'm from Tanzania, and we're happy to have Perseus coming to Tanzania as a new investor in the mining sector. We have seen, we've been with the Australians for quite a long time, and I'm part of those that have been trained by Australian managers. I'm from the supply chain profession. My former manager lives in Brisbane, and I always look back to him because he shared the global experience with us when he came to work in Tanzania. He has been in Papua New Guinea, he has been in Mongolia, he has been in some other African countries. So it's easy for someone from Australia that have been through various countries, that have been through various local issues, and bringing in the local content aspect that has been practiced elsewhere, especially in Papua New Guinea. So when he came to Tanzania in 2014, by then it was with the Acacia Mines, I mean, he shared the wealth of experience that other local communities have gone through in various jurisdictions. So here to say, these global companies, Perseus and others that have been in various places, they have a role to play when they come to countries like ours, because we haven't been out, they've been out to various jurisdictions. They have people that have had global experience, from the underground miners to technical guys to supply chain. So therefore, one of the things that I need to appreciate is there are talents in the home, in those jurisdictions that they're going to operate. They also have a responsibility to equip those resources to be able to fit in to the expectation that they want, and otherwise the blending between the international and the nationals make the most performing workforce. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. Leeanne, a couple of times there we've heard the word expectations, and you used it as well in talking about sustainable development. It makes me think of the expectations many host governments are placing now on the mining industry around using local contractors and local content, where perhaps the capability isn't quite there. Is there a challenge in being too prescriptive and forcing the issue too early?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Yeah, look, I think, as I said earlier on, there is a definite need to shift people's mindsets around what is possible. So there is a need for governments to drive local content. I think if they didn't do that, it would never happen. I think the challenge, and we're experiencing that in Tanzania at the moment, is Tanzania's got a very strong local content legislation and requirements. But when you're about to develop a $500 million project in the country, it's really important to work with the government, and the Tanzanian government have been fantastic in trying to understand this. For us, we can't get caught up in local content bureaucracy when we're trying to build a project of that size, because it will end up, impacting schedule and cost. So yes, we have to try and strike a balance. And I think, in Tanzania, as Simba said, there is a lot of capability and a lot of suppliers in the country. So I think the challenge for us is to try and, make sure we're demonstrating to the government that we're making every bit of effort. But we do know, for example, that there are certain things we cannot procure in the country. And I think Tanzania specifically has got a very long, protracted local content process. And that is something that, is a little bit unrealistic, I think, in terms of specifically in a development phase of a project. In operational space, you could probably make that work, but in the development phase, it's pretty tricky. So we're working very closely with them, and the government are trying to sort of help us jump through some of those hoops.
Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Leeanne has just said. Obviously, one should expect some of these bottlenecks, particularly when most African countries are beginning to institute this localization, policy. But obviously, as she rightly, hammered on, companies cannot afford the bureaucracies, involved, and therefore, when it comes to such situations, it's important that such companies approach the ministers responsible for mining and let them understand why certain things are, cannot be followed strictly. And obviously, human as they are, and understanding the value of that particular project certainly would make some kind of room or provisions for certain things to be done about, the law or policy that is already in place, just to make sure that the project progresses.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think one of the things, which Ghana did relatively well was they made companies come up with localization plans. So they gave them a runway to do that, which I think, helped in the process. The challenge, though, is obviously comes back to cost. Sometimes when you find you're trying to procure locally, you can get it cheaper from Australia, which, in itself becomes an issue, and it's kind of how do you balance that? So those are the challenges, I think, in that space. And it's not an easy space because the need is there, but it's kind of managing the expectations around it.
I just want to say something, a little on what Leeanne has just said. Localization doesn't necessarily mean that it must be established by the locals alone. So, for instance, Australian companies moving into West of Africa, or let's say East of Africa, could decide to set up a hub if it is West of Africa, let's say in Ghana. If it is in East of Africa, we can set up a hub, let's say in Tanzania, where they will team up with the locals to establish the kind of quality materials that they want. For instance, you need a kind of, let's say, wire mesh to help, stabilize slopes. Or let's say you need nails for, construction or whatever, cement for, you could team up with local manufacturers so that they come up with products that will meet your standards. And therefore, this issue of having to fall back on only Australia, which becomes another hurdle for you to clear with the government, can be eliminated. So all that I'm saying is companies that have long-term asset value in African countries could explore possibilities of identify the key, ingredients of their product. Let's say if it's mining, you need cement for, shotcreting, you need a whole range of items. You could team up with the local companies to establish, companies that could deliver such products to the specifications that you want. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. We've got time for one more question before we break for afternoon tea. Did we have a question? No, we don't. We've been let off lightly this afternoon. Well, I think we'll have to call it there. I was going to ask Chris a question of who makes the better mining engineers, Tanzanians, Ghanaians or Australians, but I'm going to leave him so he doesn't have to answer that question and upset any of his colleagues from any of those three countries. So if you could just join me in thanking Chris and Leeanne and, of course, Allan.